Rain ran down the hotel window in thin lines, turning Seattle into a blur of smeared light and dark water. Inside the room, the air was warm and dry, carrying the tired scent of carpet and coffee. Miles Carter sat at the desk with his laptop open tie tossed on the bed. The spreadsheet on his screen glowed a grid that refused to become a plan. One line sat highlighted in yellow: Kendrick Maritime. The meeting kept flickering in his head, sharp as a headache. Claire at the head of the table, calm and exact, insisting on a safe deck. Kendrick's CEO looking bored, fingers tapping twice on the glass. Miles choosing the risky slide pack anyway, hearing his own voice fill the room, while Claire watched without giving anything away. Then the client smiling, finally leaning forward, the mood changing so fast it felt like someone had opened a window. Miles rubbed his eyes and checked his phone. 2:00 a.m. A message from Jenna, his babysitter Lila, finally asleep. Fever's down. He exhaled. Relief lasted one breath. Guilt followed right after. 3 soft taps hit the door. Not pounding, not lost, just deliberate quiet, like the person outside knew how to knock without waking a whole floor. Miles froze with his hands hovering over the keyboard. The room felt suddenly too still. He looked at his phone again. 3 missed calls from Claire Holloway. His throat tightened. Claire did not call at 2 in the morning. Miles stood and crossed the room barefoot. In the mirror near the entry, he saw sweatpants, a faded t-shirt, hair wrecked by long hours. His eyes looked older than 35. He put his hand on the knob and listened. Only rain. The hallway smelled like wet wool and hotel soap, and he noticed immediately. He opened the door. Claire stood in the dim hallway light, black coat damp at the shoulders. A few wet strands of blonde hair had escaped her neat knot. She held a bottle of red wine in one hand and 2 paper cups in the other, the flimsy kind from the lobby. The wine looked expensive. The cups looked like she had grabbed whatever was closest and refused to think about how it would appear. Her posture was straight, her face was composed, but her eyes were too bright, as if sleep had never been an option. Miles, she said, like she was testing the sound. He kept one hand on the door. Claire. A pause. She looked past him into the room, quick assessing, then back to his face. Her gaze landed on the open laptop, then the tie on the bed, then returned to him. "Can I come in?" Her voice was low. 2 minutes. She didn't step in right away. For a second she stayed in the doorway, as if the threshold itself mattered. Water beaded on the toe of her shoe and darkened the carpet runner. The paper cups crinkled slightly under her grip. 2 minutes, Miles repeated, more question than statement. Claire's eyes met his. 2, she said again, and there was a plea inside the firmness. Miles moved aside and she entered. She paused inside, letting the door swing shut behind him without looking back. The room's quiet pressed around them. Miles reached for the bathroom towel on the rack and held it out. "I'm fine," Claire said, but her fingers brushed the cloth anyway, like she had touched something hot. Then she released it and walked to the window. Claire walked in with the same quiet certainty she brought into boardrooms. She moved like someone used to being watched. She set the bottle and the cups on the small table by the window and kept standing, shoulders squared, as if sitting would be admitting something. Miles closed the door. The click sounded louder than it should have. She turned the bottle in her hand, twisted the cap, and poured wine into the paper cups, deep red against cheap white cardboard. She handed one to him. Miles took it. The cup was warm from her hand. He noticed her watch, a slim piece of metal at her wrist, and the faint indentation it left on her skin, like she wore time too tight. "You called," he said. "You didn't answer," she replied. "I was working." Claire's eyes narrowed a fraction. "I know." Miles lifted the cup and took a sip. The wine tasted like dark fruit and smoke. "Kendrick," he said. "Yes," Claire said. "We got the account," Miles replied. Claire lifted her own cup and drank, eyes on him over the rim. Then she lowered it and set it down by the window, as if she needed her hands free. "You went against my direct instruction," she said. Miles felt heat rise behind his ribs. He kept his voice steady. "I went with what the client needed." "You went with what you wanted," Claire said. "In front of Kendrick's team? In front of mine?" Miles tightened his grip on the paper cup. The cardboard creased under his thumb. The safe deck was dying in that room. "You don't get to decide that alone," Claire shot back. "I didn't decide alone," Miles said. "I decided with every second that client stopped paying attention." Claire's jaw flexed. "You made me look like I don't control my own people." "I got us the account," Miles said. "And you made me question whether I can trust you," Claire said. Trust was her currency. Miles had watched her spend it carefully since she took the corner office. He stared at her for a beat. He could have defended himself with a dozen clean arguments. He didn't. "I believed in my strategy," he said. Claire's mouth tightened. "So did I. Silence thickened. Rain kept tapping the window with patient insistence. Miles became suddenly aware of the distance between them, 3 feet and a lifetime of rules. He forced himself to ask what he had been carrying all day. "Are you here to fire me?" Claire's eyes held his. The anger in them cooled into something controlled. "No," she said. "If I were going to fire you, I'd do it in daylight." A short laugh slipped out of Miles, wrong and thin. He lowered his gaze to the wine dark as bruised cherries in the cup. Claire watched him, her voice softened by a fraction. "You were right about the client." Your approach landed. Miles looked up, caught by the admission. "Then what is this?" Claire's gaze shifted to the window and back, as if choosing words the way she chose numbers in a forecast. "This is me telling you that results don't erase the way you got them," she said. Miles nodded. "I didn't do it to embarrass you." "Then why?" Claire asked. He thought of Lila curled under a blanket at home, forehead still warm. He thought of rent, insurance, school fees, the way a single missed paycheck could tilt his whole world. He thought of how much he hated needing anything. He swallowed, because losing that account would have been worse. Claire's eyes sharpened. Worse for the company or worse for you? Miles met her gaze. He did not blink. Both. Claire studied him. For a second, the mask she wore at work slipped just enough to show fatigue underneath. She took a sip, then set the cup down, slowly, careful, like a person putting away something that could spill. "You're in a hotel room at 2 a.m, finishing follow-ups," she said. "That's not normal." "Neither is my life," Miles said, too honest to take back. Claire's gaze dropped to the tie on the bed, the open laptop, the tired lines around his eyes. Then she looked up again, and the question she asked did not sound like a boss collecting information. "How is Lila?" she said. Miles blinked. The question was simple. It did not belong to the conversation, and that made it dangerous. "She had a fever," he said. "It's down now." Claire nodded once. Her hand slid into her coat pocket and came back out empty, but Miles heard a faint metallic click, a small habit she thought no one noticed. She looked at him steadily. "Tell me," she said, quiet and precise, "how long have you been carrying that alternate deck around in your bag?" Miles kept his eyes on Claire's face, letting her question sit between them, like a card turned over too early. "How long have you been carrying that alternate deck around in your bag?" she asked again, quieter this time, like she already knew the answer and wanted to see if he would lie. He set his cup down on the desk. The paper made a soft, hollow sound. "Since last night," he said. "I built it after you left the office." Claire's gaze sharpened. "After I told you not to use it? After you told me it was too aggressive?" Miles replied. "This is after you said Kendrick would want something safe and familiar. And you thought I was wrong," she said. "I thought we were running out of time," Miles said. He nodded toward the laptop, the spreadsheet still open, numbers waiting like they had all night. They were shopping. They wanted to feel a pulse. "You saw it too. You just chose control." Claire's mouth tightened at the word. She did not flinch, but her fingers curled around the edge of the table by the window. The city lights below looked distant and cold, smeared by rain. "You're good at making it sound noble," she said, "like you were saving us from ourselves." Miles felt the urge to defend rise in his throat, sharp and familiar. He swallowed it down and tried something else. "I didn't do it to prove you wrong," he said. Claire turned slightly, her shoulder angled toward him, her chin lifted. She looked like she was still in that glass conference room, still feeling all those eyes. "Then why didn't you tell me you had it?" she asked. "Why didn't you bring it to me in the morning and say, let's reconsider?" He let out a slow breath. "Because you would have said no," he answered, "and I would have listened. That's the part you don't want to hear." Claire's eyes flicked to his face, then away. The rain kept ticking the window. Somewhere down the hall, an elevator chimed softly, a sound like a polite interruption that never came into the room. "You're not my only leader," Claire said, and her voice sounded steadier than the room felt. "I answer to a board that watches my every move because my last name is on the building." Miles nodded once. "I know." "No," she said, and now there was a hint of heat. "You know the idea. You don't know what it feels like when your uncle smiles at you in a meeting and then calls you after to remind you he can make you disappear. You don't know what it feels like when a room full of men twice your age decides your decisions are only acceptable if they were their decisions first." Miles watched her, and he saw it. Not just anger. Something tired behind it, held together by discipline. "You made me look weak," she said. "I made you look like the person who hired the guy who won the account," Miles replied before he could stop himself. Claire's gaze snapped back to him, sharp. Miles braced for the cut. Instead, she looked at him for a long beat, then gave a short, humorless laugh. "That is the most infuriating compliment I've ever heard." He felt the tightness in his chest loosen a fraction. "You're welcome." Claire reached for her cup again. She drank, then stared at the cup as if surprised it was paper. "You don't understand what you risked," she said. "I understand exactly what I risked," Miles replied. He kept his voice even, but his hands were not. He flexed his fingers once, then shoved them into his pockets. "I risked my job. I risked your trust. I risked my reputation in front of the exec team. I risked being the guy who thought he was smarter than the room." Claire lifted her brows, and Miles hesitated. He could have left it there. He could have let it stay neat and professional. "And I risked my daughter," he said. Claire's expression shifted just slightly. The hardness around her eyes softened, like a fist unclenching. "Explain that," she said. Miles looked down at the carpet. There was a faint stain near the bed, the kind of mark that told you 100 other people had dropped drinks here and walked away. He focused on it for a second to steady himself. "Lila's school is not cheap," he said. "Her aftercare is not cheap. Her medical plan is not cheap." He raised his eyes to Claire. "And I don't have a second income. I don't have a cushion. If I lose this job, it isn't just me eating ramen and sleeping on a friend's couch. It's her." Claire set her cup down carefully, like she was afraid of making noise. "She had a fever," she said, quiet. Miles nodded. "She gets them fast. Her body runs hot. Always has." He gave a small shrug that was meant to look casual and failed. "Jenna says she's sleeping now." Claire held his gaze and the room changed again. Not because anyone moved, because the rules shifted in the air. "You never told me it was that tight," she said. Miles gave a tired smile. "That's not the kind of thing you bring up at quarterly reviews." "You could have," Claire said. He let out a low breath. Would it have changed anything? Claire's eyes narrowed, not with anger this time, but with thought. She lifted her hand to smooth back a strand of hair that had escaped her knot. Her fingers lingered at her temple for a second, as if she had a headache there. "It changes what I should have asked," she said. Miles stared at her. "Claire, I am not asking for sympathy." "I'm not offering sympathy," she replied. "I'm offering context." He almost laughed. That was Claire. Even her softness had structure. She stepped closer to the desk, the carpet muffling her shoes. "Tell me about her," she said. "Tell me about Lila." "Not the budget line items." Miles felt warmth rise in his face, a mix of pride and pain. He tried to answer without letting his voice crack. "She is stubborn," he said. "She stacks her books by color, not by subject. She thinks it makes the shelf look happier." He paused, the picture of it landing in his chest. "She makes paper cranes out of grocery receipts. She says it makes them travel further because they already know the way home." Claire's lips parted slightly, as if she had not expected that. "She sounds like she has a lot of imagination," Claire said. "She has more than me," Miles replied. "She's brave in a way that scares me." He swallowed. "When her mom died, she didn't cry in front of people. She waited until it was just us. Then she climbed into my bed and asked me if hearts can break for real." Claire did not look away. She did not reach for her cup. Her hands stayed still at her sides, but Miles saw the small movement in her throat as she swallowed. "I'm sorry," she said. Miles nodded once. "Thank you." The rain thickened against the window louder now, as if the sky had leaned in closer. Claire glanced toward it, then back. "My father used to say family comes first," she said. The words came out flat like a line she had heard too many times. Miles waited. Claire's gaze drifted down to the street. Far below, a car splashed through a puddle water, fanning out like a wing. "He said it while he missed dinners," Claire continued. "He said it while he canceled vacations. He said it while my mother stopped setting a place for him at the table because it hurt less to see one empty chair than to keep hoping it would be filled." Miles felt something settle in his stomach. He remembered the first time he met Claire, back when she was not CEO, when she was still the quiet shadow behind her father in meetings. He remembered how she watched everything like she was building a map no one else could see. "You grew up in the company," Miles said. "I grew up in rooms like this," Claire replied, and there was a faint edge to it. Hotel rooms, late nights, deals that could not wait until morning. I swore I would not become him. Miles took a slow sip of wine. The taste hit the back of his throat dark and dry. "And then you did," he said softly. Claire's eyes snapped to his, and for a second he thought he had pushed too far. Then she exhaled a small surrender. "And then I did," she echoed. She looked down at her hands and Miles noticed it again. That tiny metallic click, almost invisible. He had not imagined it. Her fingers were moving against something in her pocket. "What is that?" he asked, nodding to her hand. Claire hesitated, then pulled it out and held it up. A slim metal ruler, the kind architects use, edges worn smooth by use. Miles blinked. "You carry a ruler." Claire's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. It used to be a different life, she said. Before the board, before the title, before everyone decided I should want what they want. You wanted to be an architect? Miles said, guessing. Claire looked at him surprised. How did you know? You look at structures, he replied. You talk like you're measuring load-bearing points. She laughed, then a real sound, quick and unexpected. It filled the room in a way that made it feel less like a hotel and more like a place where someone could breathe. Miles felt his own mouth lift. That's the first time I've heard you laugh outside the office. Don't get used to it, Claire said, but the warning had no teeth. He glanced at the wine bottle. Do we have more of that control you mentioned? He asked. Or are we done with the part where you pretend this is a disciplinary meeting? Claire's smile faded into something thoughtful. She stepped closer, picked up the bottle, and poured the last of it into their cups. The wine made a soft glug against paper. For someone who came here to remind me, you exist, Miles said, keeping his voice light. You're doing a terrible job at making me feel small. Claire met his gaze over the rim of her cup. Maybe that isn't why I came, she said. The words hung between them. Claire's eyes did not waver. Miles felt his pulse kick against his ribs hard enough that he could feel it in his throat. He should have said something smart, something safe. He did not. Then why did you come? He asked. Claire held the cup in both hands as if she needed the heat. Her fingers tightened until the paper flexed. For a moment, she looked like she was about to speak and could not find the shape of it. Miles watched her waiting the reins steady and close. His phone lay face down on the desk, silent, the screen dark. Claire's mouth opened, as if she had finally found the words. Then Miles's phone buzzed on the desk, bright and insistent, rattling against the wood. A different ringtone, the one he never ignored. He grabbed it and saw Jenna's name. His stomach dropped. Jenna. Her voice came fast. Miles, her fever jumped. She woke up shaking. She keeps calling for you. Miles was already reaching for his sweatshirt. How high? 103.8, Jenna said. I gave her what you wrote down. Cool cloths. She's awake and scared. I'm coming, he said. You did right. Stay with her. He ended the call and shoved his phone into his pocket. His hands moved on instinct keys while at the door. The wine on the table suddenly looked like a prop from a different life. Claire stood very still near the window. The ruler was in her hand again, a sliver of metal catching the lamplight. Lila, she said. Miles nodded once. She wants me. Claire set her paper cup down with care. I'm coming. Miles blinked. Claire, you don't have to. I know, she said, and stepped toward the door like the decision had already been made. The hallway smelled damp. The elevator came with a soft chime. Inside, the numbers fell, and Miles watched them, as if watching could make time move faster. His thumb tapped his keys once, twice, 3 times. He stopped when he noticed he was doing it. The lobby was empty except for the night clerk, who looked up and then looked away when he recognized Claire or the way she carried herself. Outside, rain had softened into mist. The pavement shone under streetlights like wet slate. Miles flagged a cab. Northgate, he told the driver, voice tight. The car pulled away, tires hissing on the road. The windows were fogged at the edges, the city smeared into red and white streaks. Miles typed a quick message to Jenna with shaking thumbs. Tell her I am not mad. Tell her I love her. Tell her I am close. Claire sat beside him, coat still on, hair still damp at the ends. She did not fill the silence with questions. She watched Miles's breathing and seemed to match it, slow and steady, like a person setting a pace for someone who might fall. Has she done this before? Claire asked at last. Fevers, yes, Miles said. Not this high. Claire nodded once. Her fingers shifted around the ruler, a soft click. Miles glanced at it. You do that when you're nervous, he said. Claire looked out the window. I do it when I need something solid, she replied. The cab hit a rough patch of road. Miles's shoulder bumped hers. Her hand moved and rested on his palm, down, warm through the thin fabric of his sweatpants. No squeeze, no speech, just weight, as if to say the world still had edges. Miles turned his hand under hers for a second, fingers threading with hers, then let it be. His throat burned. He stared at the rain and tried to breathe. At the building he paid, stepped out and moved fast through the lobby. The elevator felt slow, the doors too polite. On the way up, a text came in from Jenna. She keeps asking if you are mad at her. Miles's chest tightened. He typed back, no. Tell her I love her. Tell her I am here. At his door, his key slipped once. He forced his fingers to calm and tried again. The lock gave. Warm air and the faint scent of children's shampoo met him. Jenna stood by the couch with her coat on, face pale. She's in your room, she whispered. She asked for the paper crane. Miles nodded. Thank you, he said, and then softer. You can go. I've got her. Jenna glanced past him and froze when she saw Claire in the doorway. Claire offered a small nod, nothing more. "Thank you for calling," Claire said. Jenna managed to nod back, grabbed her bag, and slipped out. Miles turned down the hall, then stopped. Claire had not followed. She stood just inside the entry, as if the apartment had an invisible line drawn across it. "You can come in," Miles says. Claire's eyes flicked toward the bedroom, then back to him. "I don't want to be in the way." "You're not," Miles said. "Just stay." Claire gave a small nod and closed the door gently behind her. She slipped her shoes off by the mat without being asked. The gesture was quiet, careful, like she was trying not to take up space in a life that was not hers. "Do you want me to call anyone?" she asked. "A nurse line? An urgent care? Just tell me." Miles shook his head once more, from habit than certainty. "Let me see her first." Claire nodded. "Okay, I'm here." Miles pushed his bedroom door open. Lila was curled on the bed, cheeks flushed, hair damp on her forehead. Her blanket was twisted around her legs. A paper crane sat on the pillow, one wing crushed from being held too tight. Her eyes opened and found him. "Daddy," she whispered, and the word sounded like relief. Miles sat on the edge of the bed and pressed the back of his hand to her forehead. Heat. Too much heat. He kept his voice steady. "I'm here. I'm right here." Lila's hand reached out and latched onto his sleeve. "I was cold," she said. "I know," Miles answered. He tucked the blanket around her shoulders and smoothed her hair back. "You did great." Her eyes drifted past him toward the hallway. Confusion creased her brow. "Who is that?" Miles looked back. Claire stood at the edge of the hall, not entering the room, hands folded, only her presence visible in the lamplight. "That's Claire," Miles said. "She's a friend." Lila blinked slowly. "A friend from work." Miles hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." Lila studied Claire for a long moment, then looked at Miles again. "She looks like she knows what to do," she murmured. A broken laugh caught in Miles's throat. He swallowed hard. "I'm going to get you water," he said. Small sips. "Don't go far," Lila whispered. "I won't," he promised. He reached for the thermometer on the dresser, hand steadier now that he was close to her. When he read the number, his breath went shallow. He set it down and went to the kitchen for a glass, moving fast but careful. When he returned, Claire was in the doorway holding a damp washcloth. She had found it without asking. She held it out like an offering, eyes on Lila, not on Miles. Miles took it and laid it gently on Lila's forehead. Lila sighed, a soft sound that loosened something in his chest. He helped her drink 2 small sips. Her fingers never left his sleeve. Miles lifted his eyes to Claire. No judgment, no questions, just calm. Miles nodded once, silent and grateful. Claire returned the nod, equally quiet. Lila's breathing stayed shallow, quick little pulls that made Miles hold his own breath without meaning to. The washcloth cooled fast on her forehead, warming to her heat, and he swapped it for another, moving, with the careful rhythm he had learned over years of late-night fevers and small emergencies. Claire remained in the doorway. She did not hover. She did not fill the room with nervous words. She watched Lila's face the way she watched a boardroom, taking in details, waiting for the next right move. Miles checked the time, then the bottle of children's medicine on the dresser. He read the dosage again, even though he knew it by heart. His hands did not trust his memory when fear was in the room. "Can she have more yet?" Claire asked quietly. 20 minutes, Miles said. He kept his voice low, not because Lila might wake, but because he felt like raising it would crack something open in himself. Claire nodded once and stepped back down the hall. When Miles glanced up, he saw she had gone into the kitchen, the light there dimmer, softer. He heard the cabinet close with a gentle click. Then the sink, running water, a measured, steady sound. Lila's eyes fluttered open. "Daddy," she whispered again, like she needed to reattach the word to his face. "I'm here," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." She shifted the blanket, dragging across her skin. "I don't like when I shake." "I know," he said. He touched her cheek with the back of his fingers. "Your body is fighting hard. That's what it does." Lila's gaze slid toward the hall. Claire is still there. Miles glanced back. Claire was visible in the kitchen doorway, holding a glass of water and a small bowl of ice. The ruler was not in her hand now. Both of her hands were busy, useful. "Yes," Miles said. "She's here." Lila gave a faint nod that looked like approval, then closed her eyes again. Miles rose and walked into the kitchen. The apartment smelled like peppermint, like the vapor rub he had rubbed on Lila's chest. The kettle sat on the stove, still cold. Claire had not touched it. She had opened the freezer and pulled out ice, then lined a dish towel with cubes like she was packing a wound. She held the bowl out. "For compresses," she said. Miles took it. Their fingers brushed. It was brief. It still made his pulse jump. "Thank you," he said. Claire's eyes stayed on his face, not his hands. "Did you call the nurse line?" she asked. "Not yet," he admitted. Claire's gaze did not judge. It measured. "Call," she said. "Let someone else carry the decision for a minute." Miles stared at her, then nodded. He pulled his phone out and stepped a few feet away as if distance could make the call easier. He dialed, listened to prompts, answered questions that felt too calm for the panic he had been living in. Age, weight, temperature, symptoms, medication given. Claire stood at the counter silent. She watched his posture, the way his shoulders rose when he listened, the way his jaw tightened when the nurse asked a question he could not answer. When the call ended, he set the phone down and rubbed his eyes. "They say monitor her. If she gets worse, go in." Claire exhaled a quiet release. "Okay," she said. "That's something." Miles gave a short nod. He picked up the bowl of ice and carried it back down the hall. The next hour moved in small tasks. Cool cloth, sip of water, another check of temperature. Lila whimpered once and reached for him, and he sat on the bed and let her curl into his side, her body too hot, her hands too cold. At some point, her shaking eased. The fever did not vanish, but it stopped climbing. Her breathing slowed. She fell into sleep that looked deeper, less frightened. Miles stayed still, afraid that movement would steal it from her. Claire appeared at the door again, holding a folded blanket from the couch. She did not come in. She held it up as a question. Miles nodded. Claire stepped forward and draped the blanket over his shoulders like she had done it 1,000 times. Her hand lingered near his collar for half a second, then withdrew. No fuss, no words. Miles whispered, "You can sit," and nodded toward the chair by the window. Claire shook her head. "I'll be right outside," she whispered back. He watched her leave the room. The hall light shifted as she walked away. Miles turned his face into Lila's hair and tried not to shake himself. When Lila finally slept without stirring, Miles eased his arm from under her. He tucked the blanket tight, then stood and stepped out. His legs felt hollow, like he had run miles on nothing. Claire sat on the couch, shoes off, coat folded neatly beside her. She had switched off the overhead light and left only the lamp on the room painted in warm yellow. On the coffee table sat his laptop, closed, now moved away from the kitchen like she had cleared space without asking. "You should try to rest," Claire said. Miles gave a tired laugh. "I don't know how." Claire's mouth softened. "Sit," she said, and patted the far end of the couch. Miles sat, leaving space between them. The cushion dipped under his weight. He stared at his hands, still damp from washcloth water. "Thank you for coming," he said. Claire looked toward the hallway, as if she could see through the walls. "I didn't want you doing that alone," she replied. Miles swallowed. "You didn't have to." "I know," she said again. Silence sat with them, not awkward, just full. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the rain tapping the window. Somewhere outside, a car passed tires spraying water. Claire's fingers moved once, searching for the ruler out of habit. Then she stopped herself, hands folding together in her lap. "I wasn't going to fire you," she said after a moment. Miles almost smiled. "I know that now." Claire turned her head slightly. "Do you?" He looked at her. "If you were going to do it, you wouldn't bring wine," he said. Her lips lifted brief. "Maybe I wanted to," she said, then added, "The wine was a mistake." Miles shook his head. "The paper cups were the mistake." Claire's laugh was quiet but real. Then her expression settled again, thoughtful. "Your life is heavier than I let myself consider," she said. Miles felt a sharp twist in his chest. "Don't turn this into pity." Claire's gaze held his. "It isn't pity," she said. "It's me admitting I've been looking at you like a resource." The honesty landed hard. Miles stared at her, then looked away. "I've been looking at you like an obstacle," he said, surprising himself. Claire blinked once. "An obstacle," she repeated. Miles nodded. "A brilliant one," he added, and the corner of his mouth twitched. "But an obstacle." Claire's eyes narrowed in a way that should have been sharp, but the fatigue softened it. "Because I said no," she said. "Because you don't ever leave room for someone else to be right," Miles replied. Claire's face went still. Then she breathed in slowly. "That might be true," she said. Miles glanced down the hall again toward Lila's room. "I don't get to be wrong," he said quietly. "Not in the ways that matter." Claire's voice lowered. "Neither do I," she said. They sat there while the rain kept up its steady tapping. Miles felt the night stretch long and thin, but it did not feel empty. It felt like a line drawn on paper, a boundary you could see clearly for the first time. After a while, Claire stood. "I should go," she said. Miles stood too, not because he wanted her gone, but because his body did not know how to stay seated when she moved. Claire walked toward the door, then paused. Her hand hovered over the knob. She turned back and her eyes were careful. "Do you want me to stay?" she asked. Miles opened his mouth. The honest answer rose like a wave. He let it pass. "If she wakes up, she might get scared," he said instead. Claire nodded once. "Then I'll stay on the couch," she replied and sat back down like it had been decided long ago. Miles returned to Lila's room. He checked her temperature again. Lower. Not safe yet, but lower. Relief crept in by inches. Near dawn, Lila stirred. She opened her eyes and blinked at him. "Is it morning?" she whispered. "Not yet," Miles said. "Where is Claire?" Lila asked, voice sleepy. Miles felt his throat tighten. "In the living room," he said. "She stayed." Lila's eyes drifted shut again. "Good," she murmured. "She looks like she knows where things go." Miles pressed his lips together and smoothed her hair back. When he stepped out again, he found Claire sitting upright on the couch, fully awake. She held a mug of water untouched. Her hair was slightly looser than before, a few strands framing her face. She looked like someone who had not slept in years and had finally learned how to sit with it. "She's asleep," Miles said. Claire nodded. "How is she?" "Better," he said. Then after a beat, "Thank you." Claire rose. She did not reach for her coat yet. "I'm glad," she said. Miles walked her to the door. As she slipped her shoes on, her eyes flicked to the small pile of paper cranes on the shelf near the entry. They were uneven, made from receipts and scrap paper, each one slightly different. "She makes those," Claire said, pointing. Miles nodded. "When she can't sleep." Claire stared at them for a moment. Then she opened the door and stepped into the hall. Before she left, she turned back and spoke softly. "Miles," she said. He met her gaze. "I didn't come to your hotel room because of Kendrick," she said. The words made the air between them tighten. Miles's heart thudded once hard. Claire held his gaze, then looked down briefly, as if checking her footing on something invisible. "I'll see you at the office," she said, voice steady again, and walked away without waiting for an answer. 3 days later, Miles sat in his office at Harborline Technologies, the city visible through glass behind him, gray and wet as ever. His inbox was a flood of Kendrick follow-ups. He was halfway through a call when his assistant buzzed. "Claire is here," she said. Miles's stomach tightened, the way it had at 2 in the morning, even though it was afternoon now, and the fluorescent lights made everything look too ordinary to be dangerous. "Send her in," he said. Claire entered suit crisp hair, back in its familiar knot. If he had not seen her in his apartment, he might have believed she had never left her office. The only thing different was her eyes. They lingered on him just a moment longer than they needed to. "How is Lila?" Claire asked, closing the door behind her. Miles felt the tension in his shoulders ease by a fraction. "Back at school," he said, acting like nothing happened. Claire nodded. "Good." He hesitated, then added, "She got a package yesterday, a stuffed otter. It has a Harborline logo on the tag." Claire's mouth tightened like she was trying not to smile. "She said she likes animals," Claire replied. "You remembered?" Miles said. Claire looked down at the chair across from his desk and sat posture straight. Her hands rested on her knees. "No ruler, no cup, no prop." "Miles," she said, "about that night." "We don't have to," he said quickly. He surprised himself with the speed of it. Claire's gaze stayed steady. "We do," she replied. Miles swallowed. He leaned back in his chair, forcing space between them, as if distance could keep it professional. "It was late," he said. "We were tired." Claire's voice was quiet. "I came to your room because I could not stop thinking about you," she said. "Not as your CEO." The air shifted. Miles felt it in his skin. He stared at her. His mind reached for all the reasons. The title, the board, the office gossip, the way his life was already fragile enough. "There are complications," he said, voice rough. "I know," Claire replied, "and that is why we do it the right way." Miles's throat tightened. "The right way," he repeated. Claire nodded. "We disclose," she said. "We adjust reporting lines. I remove myself from anything that touches your pay, your promotions, your position." Miles watched her, stunned by the calm precision of it. "You would do that," he said. Claire's eyes did not move. "Yes," she replied. Miles breathed in slowly. He looked at the window at the rain streaking down the glass. Then he looked back at her. "I don't want your career to burn because of me," he said. Claire's voice softened, just barely. "My career is not made of paper," she replied, "and neither is yours." The silence that followed was quiet, but thick, like a room holding its breath. Miles nodded once. "Okay," he said. Claire exhaled a small release she tried to hide. "Okay," she echoed. Later that day, they sat in a small conference room with HR, a woman named Marianne Lopez, who spoke in clear, practiced sentences. The air smelled faintly of printer toner. Forms were placed on the table, slid forward with careful hands. Claire's signature looked firm, unshaking. Miles's hand trembled slightly as he wrote his name. When they left the room, they walked side by side down the hallway without touching. Employees passed and nodded. Conversations paused and resumed. Nothing visible had changed, and yet Miles felt as if the floor had shifted beneath him. At the elevator, Claire glanced at him. Her voice was low enough that it belonged only to them. "How is she sleeping?" she asked. Miles's chest tightened, warm and aching at the same time. "Better," he said. Claire nodded once. "Good," she replied, and stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, her gaze still on him, until the last inch of space disappeared. The elevator doors sealed shut with a soft hush, and Miles stood in the hallway for a beat longer than he needed to. He watched the small panel above the doors tick downward, then the numbers vanished. The corridor smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and someone's reheated lunch. A group of analysts in lanyards passed him with polite smiles that did not linger. He walked back to his office and shut the door, not hard, just enough to make the click feel private. His hands hovered over his keyboard, then he realized he was not going to type anything that mattered right now. He leaned back, stared at the window, and watched rain thread down the glass in thin streams. His phone buzzed once. A message from Claire. "Dinner tonight, if you still want that. Reply yes or no." No greeting, no explanation. The words were clean. The space around them was not. Miles read it twice. His first instinct was to find a reason to say no. A schedule, a deadline, a need. Then his mind pulled up Lila's flushed face, the way she had asked where Claire was without fear in her voice, like it made sense for Claire to exist in their apartment. He typed yes. A pause, then another buzz. 7. Capitol Hill. I will send the address. Miles stared at the screen, then locked it and set it face down. The workday tried to continue. Kendrick emails came in. A sales lead asked for revised numbers. A junior manager dropped by to confirm talking points. Miles answered everything on autopilot and kept his face steady, but his chest felt like it was holding an extra heartbeat. At 6:45, he left the building with his collar up and his umbrella angled into the wind. The rain had shifted into a fine mist that clung to his eyelashes. Streetlights turned the sidewalks into slick mirrors. He took a rideshare to Capitol Hill, watching the city slide past in gray sheets and neon reflections. The restaurant sat between a record shop and a narrow bar with warm light spilling out. Inside, the air smelled like garlic and baked bread. It was small, loud in the good way, with a chalkboard menu and the soft clatter of plates. Miles spotted Claire immediately, not because she carried herself like a CEO, but because she looked slightly unsure of where to put her hands. She was wearing jeans and a simple cream sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a low tie that loosened around her face. No blazer, no heels. Her coat was draped over the back of the chair like it belonged there. When she saw him, she stood. For a second, she looked as if she might extend her hand, then she stopped herself. "Miles," she said. "Claire," he replied, and his voice sounded rougher than he meant it to. Claire's eyes moved over him quickly, taking in the rain on his shoulders, the damp at the ends of his hair. "You came," she said. "You invited me," he answered. A small smile touched her mouth. "I did." He pulled out her chair even though she did not need help. He did it because it gave his hands something to do. Claire sat and set her phone face down on the table, a mirror of what he had done earlier. The waiter brought water and took their orders. Claire spoke with the same calm precision she used in meetings, but she added, "Please." When the waiter left, she looked at Miles across the small candle in the center of the table. "This feels strange," she said. Miles lifted his brows. "Eating?" he asked. Claire's lips twitched. "Being here," she said, "not in a conference room, not talking about Kendrick, not measuring every word." Miles leaned back slightly. "You are still measuring," he said. Claire's gaze dropped to her lap. Her hand rose to her coat pocket by instinct, then stopped. She did not bring out the metal ruler. She folded her hands together on the table instead, fingers interlaced. "I left it in the car," she said, and the way she said it sounded like she had left something else behind, too. Miles watched her hands. "How does it feel?" he asked. Claire looked up. "Like walking without a railing," she replied. He nodded once, understanding more than he wanted to admit. "You are doing fine," he said. "I am not used to people seeing me like this," she said quietly. Miles smiled, like a person he offered. Claire laughed quick and soft. "Yes," she said, "like a person." Food arrived, steam curled up from plates. Claire ate slowly, as if tasting was a form of attention. Miles found himself watching the way she held her fork, relaxed now, not the tense grip he had seen in board meetings. She asked him about his childhood, not as a polite question, but like she was tracing the outline of a story. He told her about growing up outside Tacoma, about a mother who kept her house spotless, and a father who worked nights, about the way he learned to listen for footsteps on the porch, so he could run out and meet his dad before sleep took him again. Claire listened without interrupting. When Miles made a joke about becoming an adult who still ate cereal for dinner, her smile widened, real and unguarded. "You make it sound easy," she said. "It is not easy," he replied. "I just talk fast." Claire's eyes held his. "You talked fast in that meeting too," she said, "but you were not scared." Miles took a sip of water. The glass was cold. "I was terrified," he admitted. "I just knew if I paused you would hear it." Claire looked down at the candle flame. "I heard it anyway," she said, almost too quiet to catch. Miles stared at her. The noise of the restaurant blurred around them. A laugh at the bar. A plate clinking. Someone calling a name at the host stand. Claire lifted her gaze again. "Tell me something nobody at Harborline knows about you," she said. Miles felt his mouth tilt before he could stop it. "I write stories," he replied. Claire blinked. Stories she repeated. "For Lila," he said. "At night, I make up characters, small adventures." He hesitated, then added, "She insists on a paper crane in every story, says it keeps people from getting lost." Claire's expression softened, in a way that made her look younger. "You write them down," she said. "Sometimes," Miles answered. "Mostly I remember them until I don't." Claire watched him for a beat, then she nodded. "That is the kind of thing that matters," she said, like she was surprised to hear herself say it. Miles pointed his fork at her gentle. "Your turn," he said. Claire's fingers traced the rim of her water glass. "I never wanted to run Harborline," she said. Miles held still, waiting. "I wanted to design bridges," she continued. "Not buildings. Bridges." She looked up, and there was something almost shy in her eyes. "I liked the idea of making something that carried people from one side to another. Something that did not need applause, just needed to hold." Miles felt a small ache in his chest. "Why did you stop?" he asked. Claire's mouth tightened. "Life," she said. "My father got sick. My uncle started attending meetings. Everyone looked at me like I was the answer to a question I never asked." She took a breath. "So, I put the ruler in my pocket and learned a different kind of structure." Miles nodded slowly. "And you are good at it," he said. Claire's gaze dropped. "Good is not the same as happy," she said. He let that sit without trying to fix it. "Are you happy tonight?" he asked instead. Claire looked up. Her eyes were clear, steady. "I am," she said. Miles felt heat in his throat. He glanced away, pretending to focus on his plate, because if he held her gaze too long, he might say something reckless. When dinner ended, they stepped back into the misty night. Capitol Hill glittered in puddles and storefront lights. Claire tucked her hands into the pockets of her coat and walked beside him close enough that their shoulders almost brushed. At his car, Miles paused. "I want you to meet her," he said. Claire went still. "Lila," she replied. Miles nodded. "Only if you want," he added quickly, "and only if it feels right." Claire's eyes searched his face. "I want," she said, then corrected herself slower. "I would like that." Miles drove them north. The city thinned into quieter streets. Claire looked out the window, watching the wet trees blur past her reflection faint on the glass. She looked calmer now, like the restaurant had taken off a layer of armor, and the night air had not forced it back on. At his apartment, Miles opened the door with his key and flicked on the lamp. The place smelled faintly of detergent and the lavender soap Jenna used after washing dishes. Claire stepped inside and paused near the entry again, respecting the invisible line, until Miles nodded and said softly, "It is okay." Lila's voice carried from the hallway. "Daddy sleepy, suspicious, hopeful." Miles turned toward the bedroom. "I'm here," he called back. Lila appeared in the doorway wearing pajama pants with tiny moons printed on them. Her hair stood up in soft, chaotic strands. She blinked, saw Claire, and froze. Claire did not move closer. She bent her knees slightly, lowering herself to Lila's height without entering her space. Her hands stayed visible at her sides, empty. "Hi, Lila," Claire said. "I'm Claire." Lila stared for a long second, then glanced up at Miles. "You said she was a friend," Lila said. Miles felt his face warm. "She is," he replied. "Malkeed." Lila turned back to Claire. "From work," she added like she was completing a math problem. Claire nodded. From work, she agreed, but also just Claire. Lila's eyes narrowed, assessing. She stepped forward one cautious pace, then stopped. Her gaze flicked to Claire's sweater, then to her face. "You look different," Lila said. Claire's mouth curved slightly. Different than what she asked. Different than the picture, Lila answered, and pointed toward the hallway where Miles kept a framed Harbor Line team photo from a company event. Claire in a black suit standing stiff smile like a pin. Claire glanced toward it and then back. That picture has a lot of meetings inside it, she said. Lila considered that. Do you have meetings tonight? She asked. Claire shook her head. No meetings tonight, she said. Lila's shoulders relaxed a fraction. She walked to the shelf near the entry where her paper crane sat in a small cluster. She picked one up, a crooked bird made from a grocery receipt, and held it out to Claire. Claire's eyes dropped to the crane as if it were fragile. She reached for it slowly, careful. Lila did not let go right away. Her small fingers held the paper tight. This one is for people who get lost, Lila said. Claire's throat moved as she swallowed. Thank you, she said, and her voice sounded different, softer, like she had stepped out of a room she did not know was holding her breath. Lila finally released the crane. Claire held it in her palm, not crushing it, not folding it away, just holding it like it meant something. Lila looked up at Miles again, then back to Claire. Do you know what to do when someone has a fever? She asked. Claire blinked, then nodded. Cool cloth, she said. Small sips of water. Stay close. Lila studied her for a moment, then gave a tiny approving nod, as if Claire had passed a test no adult knew was happening. Okay, she said, and yawned so wide her eyes watered. She turned toward Miles and lifted her arms. Miles picked her up. Her body was warm and heavy with sleep. He kissed her hair. You should be in bed, he murmured. Lila's gaze stayed on Claire over his shoulder. Claire can come to the museum, she said, half asleep now, words slurring together. The one with the big heart. Miles froze for half a second. Claire's eyes met his. Neither of them spoke. Miles carried Lila down the hall and tucked her into bed. She clutched her stuffed otter, the one with the Harbor Line tag, and mumbled something that sounded like no meetings. When he returned to the living room, Claire was still standing near the entry paper crane in her hand. She looked at the small space as if seeing it for the first time, the scattered crayons on the table, the child-sized socks by the couch, the worn corner of the rug where Lila played. She is, Claire said quietly, and the rest of the sentence did not come. Miles nodded. She is, he agreed. Claire lifted the crane slightly. I will keep this, she said. Miles watched her. Good, he replied. They stood in the lamplight close enough to feel each other's warmth, not touching. Claire's gaze moved to Miles's face, then to the hallway, then back again. Miles opened the door for her. The night air was cool and damp. Claire stepped into the hall, then paused and turned. Thank you, she said. Miles blinked. For what, he asked. Claire's eyes held his for a beat. For letting me be seen, she said, and then she left her footsteps soft on the carpet runner. Miles closed the door after Claire left and stood with his hand on the knob until her footsteps faded into the quiet hallway. The apartment felt warmer without the draft, softer without the tension that had carried through the past week. From the bedroom came the small, steady sound of Lila breathing. He checked on her once more. She was curled on her side, stuffed otter tucked under her chin, one fist wrapped around the edge of the blanket as if she were holding the night in place. Miles eased the door mostly shut and stood in the dim hall listening. The refrigerator hummed. Rain ticked the window. Everything ordinary, and somehow that made him feel shaken. His phone lit up with a single message. Home safe. Claire. Miles stared at the words, then typed back. Yes, thank you. He hesitated, then added a second line. She liked you. The reply came after a pause that felt like a held breath. I liked her too. Miles slipped the phone into his pocket and leaned back against the wall. He let himself smile, small and tired, before he went to wash the dishes that no one had asked him to wash. By Monday, the office was its usual bright machine. The lobby smelled like espresso and polished stone. Harbor Line's logo glowed on a wall that looked expensive enough to be its own statement. People moved fast, eyes on screens, voices clipped in the way they were when a big account was on the line. Miles walked into the morning status meeting with Kendrick materials tucked under his arm. Claire was already there, seated at the head of the table, hair in its familiar knot suit sharp enough to cut. The room's temperature seemed to drop into place around her. She looked at Miles for the briefest moment. No smile, no recognition, just a calm, professional nod that could have meant anything to anyone else. Miles took his seat. During the meeting, Claire questioned him the same way she always did. Precise, unforgiving. She pushed on numbers, assumptions, timelines. She made him defend choices he knew were right. It was not cruelty. It was pressure applied in a way that made results stronger. When he finished, she let the silence stretch, then said, "Good, that is the standard." It was the closest thing to praise she gave in public. Afterward, as people filed out, Claire stood with her tablet and spoke to the room at large. Kendrick's team responded to clarity. Keep it clean. Keep it honest. Nobody sells them a fantasy. Her eyes flicked to Miles for a fraction of a second as she said it. Miles felt the look land on him like a hand on his shoulder, invisible but real. In the hallway, he heard two analysts whisper as they passed. She is relentless. She has to be. You know her uncle is watching. Miles kept walking face neutral, as if he had not heard a thing. In the weeks that followed, their days fell into a rhythm that held. At work, Claire and Miles spoke like colleagues. They met in glass rooms, exchanged documents, argued about strategy. Their voices stayed level. Their hands stayed to themselves. If they stood too close at the printer, one of them stepped back. If their eyes caught in a crowded hallway, Claire looked away first. It was a discipline that felt practiced even when it wasn't. In the quiet after hours, the rules softened. Claire would text late short questions that sounded like they belonged to a different version of her. Did she eat dinner? How was the cough? Did you sleep? Miles would answer from his kitchen while stirring pasta, or from Lila's doorway while watching her fall asleep, or from the couch with his laptop closed at last. She is fine. She wants to know if you have meetings. No meetings tonight. Tell her I said hi. On a Saturday when the sky stayed low and gray, Claire met Miles and Lila at the Pacific Science Center. The building smelled like damp coats and popcorn, and the floor shone with footprints and spilled soda. Lila ran ahead quick as a bird, then stopped and looked back as if checking that they were following. Claire moved through the crowd with an almost visible effort to let herself be anonymous. No assistance, no security, no schedule. Just her jeans, a simple jacket, and the paper crane tucked carefully into her pocket like a secret. At the heart exhibit, Lila pressed her palm against the glass and watched the giant model pulse with red light. It is loud, Lila said, eyes wide. Miles stood behind her, hands in his pockets. That is the point, he said. It never shuts up. Claire stepped closer, careful not to crowd. It is a strong machine, she said. Lila tilted her head. Do people's hearts get tired? She asked. Claire's gaze flicked to Miles, then back to Lila. Yes, she said, but they still keep working, even when they do not feel like it. Lila considered that, then turned to Claire. Do you have a machine heart? She asked. Miles choked on a laugh. Claire blinked once, then let her mouth curve. Sometimes it feels like it, she said. Lila stared, then nodded as if that made perfect sense. Okay, she said, and darted to the next station. They spent the afternoon moving through light and sound. Lila built a tiny bridge from plastic beams, then demanded Claire test it by pressing down gently. How much weight? Lila asked, bossy in the way only children could be. Claire pulled the slim metal ruler from her pocket and held it up. I usually measure first, she said. Lila's eyes lit. You brought it, she said, delighted. Claire hesitated, then handed it to her. Lila held it like a treasure, then used it to measure the distance between beams with fierce seriousness. Miles watched chest tight in a way he could not explain. Claire's face was softer than he had ever seen it. Not relaxed exactly, but present, like she had finally stepped out of her own shadow. After the museum, they ate at a small place near the waterfront. Lila slurped noodles and declared them the best thing she had ever tasted. Claire tried to pretend she was not amused by the drama of it. She failed. Back at the apartment, Lila insisted on building a blanket fort in the living room. She dragged pillows into a crooked tunnel and taped paper cranes to the ceiling. No adults can come in unless they knock, Lila announced. Miles raised his brows. Knock how he asked. Lila held up 3 fingers. 3 taps, she said, as if that was the only reasonable number. Claire's eyes shifted to Miles, quick and unreadable. Miles lifted his knuckles to the side of the couch and knocked 3 soft times. The sound was small, almost ridiculous, and it made his throat tighten anyway. Approved, Lila said, and scooted back to make room. Claire hesitated at the entrance, then knelt and tapped 3 times on the pillow like it was a door. When Lila squealed and waved her in, Claire crawled into the fort with awkward Grace hair falling loose around her face. The ceiling was low, the air warm and thick with kid breath and laundry detergent. Claire sat cross-legged and tried to fold her long legs into a space made for someone half her size. Lila handed her a flashlight and whispered, "No meetings." Claire whispered back, "No meetings." Miles sat outside the fort and watched them. He felt something inside him ease a knot he had not known he was carrying. Rain pattered softly against the window, and for the first time in a long time it did not sound like pressure. Some nights Claire stayed for dinner. She never arrived with wine now. She arrived with small, useful things. A bag of oranges, a new set of markers because she noticed Lila's were running dry, a cheap cookbook from a thrift store with sticky notes on pages that looked manageable. She would stand at Miles's counter and chop vegetables with practiced precision sleeves rolled up hands steady. Miles would watch her move in his kitchen and feel the strangeness of it in a quiet, grateful way. Once while Lila colored at the table, Claire washed a plate and said, "My mother used to hum while she cooked." Miles looked up from drying his hands. "Does she still?" he asked. Claire's gaze stayed on the running water. "She lives in Phoenix now," she said. "She likes the sun. She likes places where people do not ask about Harbor Line." The words were simple, but the space around them was heavy. Miles nodded and did not push. Claire rinsed the soap away as if rinsing a thought. Later, when Lila was in bed, Miles and Claire would sit on the couch with the lamp on low. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they did not. Silence between them stopped feeling like an empty room. It started feeling like a place to rest. One night, Miles pulled out the notebook, where he sometimes scribbled Lila's stories, and read a paragraph aloud. The story was about a paper crane that traveled across a city of rain to deliver a message to someone who had forgotten how to sleep. Claire listened without interrupting. When he finished, she did not praise it like a manager. She simply said, "She is lucky," and her voice caught on the last word. Miles stared at her for a beat. "So am I," he replied, and the honesty of it made him look down at his hands. Not everything was soft. There were days when Claire came into the office with the kind of tension that sat on her shoulders like a coat she could not remove. She would move through meetings faster, answer questions shorter, press her lips together when someone said something that sounded polite but carried a blade under it. Miles learned to see it in the small things. The way her fingers searched for the ruler even when she tried not to. The way she tapped her pen once, twice, then stopped before it became 3. After one late meeting, Miles found her alone in a small conference room. Lights dimmed, laptop open the rain, throwing moving shadows across the glass walls. She looked up when he entered, and for a second the CEO face slipped. "You should go home," she said. Miles set a paper cup of coffee on the table in front of her. "So should you," he replied. Claire's mouth tightened, but she did not push it away. She wrapped her hands around the cup and stared at it as if it were holding her together. "They expect perfection," she said quietly. Miles sat across from her, leaving space, giving her room to breathe. "They expect a performance," he said. "Perfection is just the costume." Claire let out a short, tired exhale. "You are getting bold," she said. "I am getting familiar," he answered. Claire's eyes met his. The look was brief, but it held everything they refused to show in daylight. Outside, rain slid down the windows in slow lines. Inside, Claire lifted the cup and took a sip. Her shoulders lowered a fraction, almost imperceptible. Miles did not reach for her hand. He did not have to. He stayed. He let the room be quiet around them until her breathing found a steadier pace. When she stood to leave, she slipped the ruler into her pocket and paused by the door. "Tell Lila I will come by soon," she said. Miles nodded. "I will." Claire walked out into the hallway, first posture back in place. Miles followed a step behind, careful, professional, as if they were only leaving a meeting. In the elevator lobby, she pressed the button and stared at the closed doors. Her reflection looked calm in the polished metal, almost convincing. Miles watched her face, then glanced at the rain streaking down the tall windows at the end of the hall. He listened to the steady tick of it and let himself breathe with it, slow and even, like a heartbeat that refused to quit. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. Claire stepped in first. Shoulders squared, face settled into the calm mask that made people straighten their backs without knowing why. Miles followed a beat later, careful to keep the space between them neutral. The doors closed, sealing them in a bright metal box that smelled faintly of citrus cleaner. Claire stared at the floor indicator as it slid down. Her reflection in the mirror panel looked composed. Her fingers, however, pressed lightly against the seam of her coat pocket, searching for the shape of the ruler that was not there. Miles watched her, then looked away before the moment could become something else. When the doors opened in the lobby, the sound of rain rushed in from the revolving entrance like a steady whisper. Claire walked out first. Miles held the door for a woman with a stack of mail. They parted at the curb with the simplest nod, like two people leaving a late meeting, not two people trying to pretend their lives had not shifted. The next morning, Harbor Line felt different. Not in any obvious way. The espresso machine still hissed. The lobby still smelled like polished stone and money, but the air carried an edge, a thin electric tension that made people speak softer and walk faster. A few employees stood in small clusters near the glass wall, phones angled low, eyes flicking up when anyone important passed. Miles rode the elevator to his floor and stepped out into a corridor that was too quiet for a Tuesday. His assistant Rena looked up from her desk with a face that was careful. "You should see this," she said and slid her tablet across the desk. On the screen was a headline from a business site. The words were clean and brutal. "Stonegate Capital acquires significant stake in Harborline Technologies." Below it a smaller line. "Push for board changes expected." Miles felt a cold drop in his stomach. He looked up at Rena. "Where did this come from?" "Someone leaked," she said. Her voice was low. "It is everywhere." He took the tablet into his office, closed the door, and pulled up his inbox. A calendar invite sat at the top, marked urgent. Emergency board session, 8:30, attendance required, executive team. Miles sat down slowly. His hands hovered over the mouse, then stilled. He stared at the screen, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less dangerous. Stonegate was not a rumor. It was a machine. It bought companies, carved them clean, and sold the pieces with a smile. Harborline was old enough to have history. History was something that could be priced. Miles stood, grabbed his notebook, and headed down the hall. The boardroom on the top floor was already filling when he arrived. The glass walls looked out over Seattle's gray skyline. Rain slid down the windows in long, patient lines. Inside, a row of suited people sat with laptops open, faces tight. Legal counsel stood near the door with a stack of folders and the look of someone who had not slept. Claire was at the head of the table, posture perfect. She wore a navy suit that looked like it had never known a wrinkle. Her hair was in its familiar knot. If Miles had not learned her tells, he might have believed she was fine. Then he saw her hands. One finger tapped lightly against the table, once, twice. Then it stopped. Walter Halloway sat 2 chairs to her right, older silver hair combed back, smile polished like a coin. He leaned back as if the room belonged to him by default. When Miles entered, Walter's eyes flicked to him with quick interest, then moved on. Miles took a seat near the end. He opened his notebook but did not write. He watched. A board member spoke first, voice clipped. Stonegate crossed 10%. Legal counsel nodded, through a series of purchases. They stayed just under public attention until they did not. Walter sighed, theatrically mild. "So now we have attention." Another member, a woman with sharp glasses, said, "They want board seats." Walter spread his hands. "Of course they do. That is what they do." Claire's face did not change. "They will claim they want efficiency," she said. "They will use the word accountability. They will say they can unlock value." Walter turned toward her, smile still in place. "And can they?" Claire's eyes held his. "They can unlock the doors and strip the wiring," she replied. A few people shifted. Someone cleared their throat. Walter's smile thinned. "We should not dramatize," he said. "Stonegate makes investors happy. That is not nothing." Claire did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "Harborline is not a spreadsheet," she said. "It is a long relationship. With clients, with ports, with unions, with this city." Walter leaned forward, elbows on the table. "This city does not sign checks," he said softly. "Investors do." Miles felt his jaw tighten. He kept his eyes down. He let Claire handle her uncle the way she always did, with calm and steel. Claire looked around the table. "We have 2 problems," she said. "Stonegate and the story Stonegate will tell. The story says we are slow, sentimental, and ripe." The woman with sharp glasses asked, "What is your plan, Claire?" Claire's shoulders lifted slightly with a breath. She held it in, then released it in a controlled exhale. "We show strength," she said. "We show growth that cannot be gutted without destroying the product. We make it expensive to break us." Walter's tone turned almost kind. "That sounds nice," he said. "Tell us how." Claire did not answer immediately. Miles watched her eyes flick just once toward the far end of the table where he sat. It was quick. It said nothing. It asked everything. "I will come back with a strategy by tomorrow morning," Claire said. Walter raised his brows. "That is fast." "It has to be," Claire replied. The meeting ended in a storm of smaller conversations. Legal counsel pulled Claire aside. A board member asked for a call. Someone from finance hovered with numbers. The room churned. Miles waited until the crowd thinned. Claire was gathering papers into a neat stack, each edge aligned like she could force order into chaos by making corners straight. He approached quietly. "Do you want help?" he asked. Claire did not look up right away. "Help with what?" she replied, voice neutral. Miles kept his tone simple. "With the story," he said, "with what they will hear." Claire's eyes lifted to his. Her expression stayed controlled, but the fatigue was there, faint in the shadows under her eyes. "Meet me in my office in 20 minutes, she said. Miles nodded once and walked away without another word. Her office sat at the end of a hallway with thick carpet and framed photos of Harborline's early days. The founder in a hard hat, the first warehouse. A black and white shot of a ship at dock. The images looked like a family album built out of industry. When Miles entered, Claire was standing at the window, misted behind her back. Rain washed the skyline into a watercolor. She did not turn. "You saw Walter," she said. "Yes," Miles replied. "He will side with whoever gives him a clean exit," she said. "He calls it stability. It is just control." Miles stayed near the door, giving her space. "And the board?" he asked. Claire finally turned. Her eyes were sharp, but something in them looked bruised. "Half of them are scared," she said. "The other half are tired. Stonegate knows how to use both." Miles nodded slowly. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Claire walked to her desk and opened a drawer. She pulled out her metal ruler and set it on the blotter, like a weapon laid down with intention. The small click of metal on leather sounded too loud in the quiet office. "I want to change the shape of the game," she said. Miles waited. Claire picked up a marker and moved to the whiteboard. She drew 2 boxes, then a line between them. She labeled one harbor line core. She labeled the other platform. Her handwriting was precise, clean. "We have something they cannot replicate fast," she said, pointing to the platform box. "Our data pipeline, our port integrations, the trust we built. We have been treating it like support. Stonegate will treat it like inventory." Miles felt his mind start to move. "You want to separate it," he said. Claire nodded. "Yes, a structural split, not a sale, a shield." Miles stepped closer, careful. "A subsidiary," he said, voice low. "A company inside the company." Claire's gaze met his. "Exactly," she said, and the word carried more weight than business. Miles understood the risk in it instantly. A new entity meant scrutiny. It meant headlines. It meant a board that could panic harder. It meant a narrative Stonegate could try to twist. "It has to look like growth," Miles said. "It has to be growth," Claire replied. Miles stared at the board. "Open partnerships," he murmured, thinking aloud. "Make it messy to cut. Create commitments they cannot unwind without lawsuits and public fallout." Claire nodded once. "We sign long-term contracts with ports that require the platform," she said. "We lock in clients on terms that reward staying." Miles's pulse quickened. "We go public with transparency," he said. "We show the metrics. We show the pipeline. Stonegate thrives in shadows. Light makes them uncomfortable." Claire's eyes narrowed, impressed despite herself. "That is bold," she said. Miles gave a small, tired smile. "You hired me," he replied. For a moment the room held still. The rain whispered against the glass. Claire's hand hovered over the ruler, then settled on it, palm flat, as if grounding herself. Then her phone rang. She answered without looking. "Yes," she said. "No, I will not be stepping down. Send them the schedule. I will speak to the board." She hung up and stared at the whiteboard again. Her jaw tightened. "They are already calling," she said. Miles watched her shoulders rise with a breath and settle again. He saw the weight she carried, the constant need to be unbreakable in rooms full of people ready to interpret any crack as permission. "I can write the external narrative," Miles said, "if you want me to." Claire's gaze sharpened. "You already do," she replied, then softened slightly. "Do it." Miles nodded. He looked at the clock. "When do you sleep?" he asked. Claire's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "When Stonegate leaves," she said. Miles did not laugh. He walked to the small coffee station in her office and filled 2 cups from the pot that had been sitting too long. The coffee smelled burnt. He added cream to hers because he had noticed she always did. He set the cup near her hand. Claire looked at it, then at him. "You should not know that," she said quietly. Miles shrugged. "I notice," he replied. Claire's eyes held his for a beat longer than was safe. Then she picked up the cup and took a sip, as if the ritual gave her permission to keep standing. They worked through the day in fragments. Calls, numbers, drafts, legal language that tried to sound human, marketing language that tried to sound honest. By late afternoon, Miles's eyes felt gritty. Claire's posture stayed perfect, but her voice grew thinner, like a wire pulled tight. At 6, Miles forced her to leave the office long enough to eat. They went to a quiet place downstairs where nobody important would wander in. Claire barely touched her food. She stared at the table like it was a map she could not fold right. Miles watched her fingers tap the ruler against her palm under the table. Once, twice. "Stop." "Claire," he said gently. She looked up. "You do not have to carry every pound alone," he said. Her expression flickered irritation, trying to rise, then falling back under exhaustion. "I have always carried it," she said. Miles held her gaze. "That does not mean you should," he replied. Claire stared at him for a long moment. Then she looked away out the window where rain blurred the streetlights into soft halos. That night, she did not go home. She returned to her office. Miles went to pick up Lila from Jenna, fed her, helped with homework, and tucked her into bed. Lila insisted on 3 taps before he entered her blanket fort, even though the fort was only 2 pillows now and 1 sagging sheet. When the apartment finally went quiet, Miles went back to Harbor Line. The building at night felt like a different creature. The lobby lights were dimmed. The espresso machine was silent. The air smelled of cleaning solution and empty hallways. The elevator hummed up, and Miles listened to the sound like a heartbeat in a body trying to sleep. Claire was in her office alone, whiteboard filled with boxes and arrows. Her jacket was off. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbows. Her hair had loosened slightly, a few strands falling near her cheek. She looked up when he entered and did not pretend surprise. "You came back," she said. Miles held up a paper bag. "Food," he replied. "Real food." Claire stared at it as if it were an unfamiliar object. "I do not have time," she said. "You do," Miles answered. "Your body just does not believe it." He set the bag down, then placed a printed draft beside it. "Press statement," he said. "Investor letter. Talking points for internal teams." Claire scanned the first page, eyes moving fast. She stopped at a sentence and looked up. "This is good," she said. Miles nodded. "It is honest," he replied. "Honest is harder to attack." Claire's fingers pressed lightly on the paper. The ruler sat near her elbow, the metal catching the lamplight. She looked like someone holding 2 lives in the same hand, trying not to drop either. "Sit," she said. Miles sat across from her, the same careful distance they kept in daylight. The room was quiet, except for rain ticking the window and the faint hum of the building's ventilation. Claire leaned forward. "If I do this split," she said, tapping the whiteboard with the ruler, "they will say I am hiding assets. They will say I am protecting my job." Miles looked at the board, then back at her. "Then you say the truth," he replied. "You are protecting the company from people who would sell its bones." Claire's eyes narrowed. "They will ask why now," she said. Miles did not hesitate. "Because Stonegate forced the question," he said, "and you are answering with a structure they cannot break." Claire stared at him, and for a moment the CEO face fell away. She looked tired. She looked human. She looked like a woman who had been taught that resting was the same as failing. "What if the board votes me out anyway?" she asked quietly. Miles felt his chest tighten. He kept his voice steady. "Then they vote you out," he said, "and they will regret it. But you will have done the right work." Claire's gaze dropped to the ruler. Her fingers traced its edge like she was checking it for sharpness. "You make it sound simple," she said. "It is not simple," Miles replied. "It is just clear." Claire looked up. Her eyes were bright with something she refused to name. "Are you with me?" she asked. Miles did not speak for a beat. Not because he was uncertain, but because he understood the weight of the words in a room where everything could become evidence. "I am with you," he said. Claire held his gaze, then nodded once, sharp and decisive, as if she had just locked in a final measurement. The next morning, the boardroom filled again. Coffee cups, legal folders, polished faces pretending calm. Rain pressed against the windows like a constant hand. Claire walked in with a binder under her arm. Miles followed with a slim stack of materials, his name nowhere on the cover. They took their places without touching, without looking too long. Walter watched Claire and her smile already waiting. "Well," he said lightly, "have you saved us yet?" Claire set her binder on the table. The sound was solid, final. She did not return Walter's smile. She opened the binder, looked around the room, and began to speak. Claire set her binder on the table. The sound landed with a weight that made a few heads lift. Miles sat still at the far end, hands folded over his notes, eyes on Claire's face. She did not start with Stonegate. She started with Harbor Line. She spoke about the docks and the people who kept them moving. She spoke about clients who trusted them with cargo and data, the kind of trust that took years to earn and one bad quarter to break. She pointed to the window not dramatically, just as a fact. "Seattle is built on water," she said. "You cannot pretend water is optional." Walter leaned back, fingertips steepled. "Nice speech," he said. "Where is the math?" Claire opened the binder and slid the first page across the table. It was clean, no fluff. A structure drawn in boxes and lines. Harbor Line core, Harbor Line platform. Contracts, commitments. A timeline that looked aggressive and credible at the same time. "This is the math," she said. A board member with tired eyes flipped through the pages. "A subsidiary," he murmured. "A platform company," Claire corrected gently. "We have treated the platform like support. Stonegate will treat it like inventory. We stop them by making the platform the engine." Walter's smile stayed in place, but his eyes sharpened. And you think investors will applaud a split while we are under attack. Claire met his gaze. I think investors will applaud a plan that makes this business harder to gut, she replied. Stonegate is not buying us because we are weak. They are buying us because we are valuable. We become more valuable, intact. A woman on the board tapped her pen against the binder. This exposes us, she said. Transparency invites scrutiny. Claire nodded once. Scrutiny already exists, she replied. Transparency lets us control the frame. Miles watched the room as Claire spoke. He saw the small signs, a chin lifting in interest, a shoulder easing, a phone set face down instead of checked again. People were listening. Walter tried another angle softer, like a hand on a shoulder that still pushed. Claire, you are asking them to bet on a story. Stories break. Claire's voice stayed even. Then we build a story with steel, she said. Contracts, partnerships, terms that reward stability, metrics we publish because we can stand behind them. A board member glanced toward legal. Legal counsel gave a cautious nod. Walter's eyes flicked to Miles. And this is yours, Walter said, voice light. Or did your marketing director teach you how to gamble? Miles kept his face neutral. Claire did not look at him. She did not rescue him. She did not sacrifice him either. This is mine, Claire said, and the certainty in it shut the room down. The discussion went on for an hour, then 2. Questions came sharp. Claire answered with patience that looked effortless until you watched her hands. Her fingers touched the edge of her ruler once, then let go. She kept her voice steady. She kept her gaze level. She did not plead. When the chair finally called for a vote, the air tightened. Pages stopped turning. Coffee cups stopped moving. Miles stared at the center of the table, not at faces. He listened to each yes as if counting steps across a bridge. Yes, yes, no, yes. Another pause longer than the last. Yes. The chair looked down at the tally, then up. The motion carries, she said. For a second, nobody moved. It was like the room needed permission to breathe again. Then a few people exhaled at once, a quiet wave. Claire nodded once as if she had expected it all along. Only Miles saw the small release in her shoulders. Walter's smile stayed polite. Congratulations, he said. Now you get to do the hard part. Claire looked at him calm and sharp. I have been doing the hard part, she replied. When the board dispersed, Claire gathered her binder with the same neat precision as before, but now her fingers were steadier. Miles waited until the room emptied, then approached. You did it, he said quietly. Claire's eyes met his for a moment. Nothing romantic in her face, nothing that could be read by a hallway camera, but there was a warmth under the control. We did it, she replied. Miles gave a small nod. You are gonna hate this, he said, but I am proud of you. Claire's mouth tightened, like she was trying not to smile. I hate it, she said. Then the smile slipped through anyway, brief and real. For the next 3 weeks, Harborline moved like a ship turning against current. Press calls came in. Investor questions arrived in sharp bursts. Claire held meetings that started on time and ended later than they should have. Miles shaped the language that wrapped around the truth without smothering it. He wrote statements that sounded like Harborline, not like fear. Stonegate pushed, Claire pushed back. One afternoon, a message hit Claire's screen. She read it without expression, then walked into Miles's office and closed the door. They are stepping back, she said. Miles blinked. Stonegate, he asked. Claire nodded once. Her eyes looked brighter, like sleep had not found her, but relief had. Miles stood slowly. He did not cheer. He did not clap. He just let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped under his ribs for days. Claire looked at him. It worked, she said, voice low. Miles nodded. You worked, he replied. Claire's hand went into her pocket and came out with the ruler. She held it for a second, then set it on Miles's desk, like she was finally done needing it. That night, Miles took her back to the small restaurant in Capitol Hill, where she had first shown up in jeans and a soft sweater. The place smelled the same garlic and warm bread, but the candlelight felt different. The weight in Claire's face had eased. She still looked like herself, controlled, clear, but her eyes were not braced for impact. They ate and talked about small things. A story Lila had invented about an otter detective. A new jazz album Miles found on the way home from work. The kind of conversation that did not need to prove anything. When dessert arrived, Miles lifted his glass of water. To the woman who just outbuilt Stonegate, he said. Claire lifted her own glass. To the man who wrote the words that kept our spines straight, she replied. Miles smiled. That sounded like a compliment, he said. Claire's eyes narrowed. "Do not get used to it," she said, but she did not sound like she meant it. After dinner, they walked outside into air that felt cleaner than usual, the rain finally easing into a light mist. Capitol Hill glowed with damp pavement and storefront lights. They walked without touching at first, out of habit. Then Claire's hand brushed his, and neither of them pulled away. Miles drove them down toward the waterfront, away from crowds. The city lights reflected off the dark water, rippling and breaking, like the world was made of moving glass. They walked along the path where the sound of distant traffic faded into the steady hush of waves. They stopped near a railing that looked out at the bay. A ferry horn sounded far off, low and lonely. Claire rested her hands on the rail. The wind tugged a few strands of hair loose. She looked calmer in the open air, like the sky gave her room. Miles stood beside her, close enough to feel her warmth. He stared at the water for a moment, then spoke. "These months have been the happiest I have felt since he started, then stopped." He did not say his wife's name. He did not need to. The space around the unfinished sentence said it for him. Claire's gaze shifted to his face. She did not fill the silence. She waited the way she did when she wanted the truth. Miles swallowed. His throat felt tight, but his hands were steady. "You have become essential to us," he said, "to me, to Lila." Claire's eyes softened. "Miles," she said, and the single word held caution and longing at the same time. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He did not drop to one knee. The ground was damp. The moment did not need theater. It needed honesty. He held the box between them. "I am not asking for an answer right now," he said, voice low. Then he paused and something in his face changed. He corrected himself, not with panic but with clarity. "I am asking," he said, "because I want you. I want a life that is not divided into boardrooms and hallways and careful doors. I want you in our home in the morning. I want you there when Lila builds her forts. I want you there when I forget to breathe." Claire stared at him. The city lights turned her eyes into a brighter blue. Her lips parted slightly. She did not move. Miles opened the box. The ring was simple, a clean band and a single stone that caught the light without screaming for it. It looked like something built to last. Claire's gaze dropped to the ring, then lifted to his face. Her expression tightened, not with doubt, but with the practical mind fighting the open heart. "You know this complicates everything," she said. Miles nodded once. "Some things are worth the complication," he replied. Claire looked down at the water, then back at him. Her fingers rose, touched the edge of the box lightly, then pulled back. Her eyes shone not with tears yet, but with the threat of them. "Miles," she said again, softer. He held still. He did not push. He let her take the moment in her own way. Claire stepped closer. She lifted both hands and framed his face, palms warm against his cheeks. The gesture was not CEO Claire. It was Claire, plain and unarmored. She kissed him steady and sure, like she had chosen her side and did not intend to be moved again. When she pulled back, her breath was uneven. "Yes," she whispered. Miles let out a shaky breath that sounded almost like a laugh. He slid the ring onto her finger carefully, as if it might break if he moved too fast. The metal caught the waterfront light and held it. Claire looked at her hand for a moment, then closed her fingers like she was making it real. They stood there by the water, close, quiet, listening to the city breathe behind them. When Miles drove home, Claire's hand rested on the center console, near his, not touching, but close enough that the warmth carried. At the apartment, they paused outside Lila's door. Miles lifted his knuckles and tapped softly. 3 times. Claire's eyes met his and her mouth curved. Miles opened the door and stepped in. Lila was asleep, face turned toward her stuffed otter, one paper crane resting on the pillow like a small guard. Miles pulled the blanket up to her shoulder. Claire stood in the doorway, ring glinting faintly in the hall light. She did not enter the room. She simply watched, quiet and present, as if learning the shape of the life she had just agreed to hold. The ring caught light in odd places. In the elevator mirror, in the glass wall of the boardroom, in the kitchen when Claire reached for a mug and the overhead bulb flashed across the stone. She did not hide it. She also did not announce it. It sat on her hand like a quiet decision that did not need a press release. Miles noticed the way people noticed. A second too long on her left hand. A glance that slid away when she looked up. Nobody said anything out loud. Harbor Line ran on what people did not say. At home, Lila noticed in the blunt, clean way only a child could. "That is shiny," she said one evening at the table, pointing with a marker. Claire looked down at her finger, as if she had forgotten it was there. "It is," she said. "Is it a promise?" Lila asked. Miles froze with a fork halfway to his mouth. Claire did not look at Miles for permission. She looked at Lila. "Yes," she said. "It is a promise." Lila considered that, then nodded once, satisfied. "Okay," she said, and went back to coloring a crane with purple wings. The days stayed busy. Kendrick demanded updates. Stonegate stayed quiet, which felt like an animal watching from tall grass. Claire moved through the office with her usual precision. Miles kept the work clean and the stories cleaner. Some nights, when Lila fell asleep on the couch, Claire carried her to bed with surprising ease, as if her arms had always known the weight of a child. Then on a bright morning that felt wrong for Seattle, the call came. Miles was in a conference room on the 4th floor, presenting updated platform numbers to a mixed team from Kendrick and Harborline. The screen behind him showed a clean chart confidence made visible. People leaned forward. A Kendrick executive in a gray suit nodded once, slow as if approving the pace. Miles was halfway through a sentence when his phone lit up on the table. Northgate Elementary. His heart dropped so fast it felt like it hit the floor. He tried to ignore it. He told himself it was a schedule reminder, a field trip form, a nurse asking about a lunch allergy. The phone kept buzzing steady and insistent, vibrating against the wood. He excused himself with a tight smile. One moment, he said, voice controlled. He stepped into the hallway and answered. "Mr. Carter," a woman's voice said, breathless and shaken. "This is Ms. Dyer, the assistant principal. Your daughter collapsed during recess. The paramedics are here. They are taking her to Northwest Hospital." Miles grabbed the wall with his free hand. The corridor blurred at the edges. "What happened?" he asked, and the words came out too loud. "We do not know," she said. "She was running, then she went down. She is awake, but she is scared. Please come now." Miles did not remember ending the call. He only remembered walking back into the conference room with a face he did not recognize. "I have to go," he said. He did not offer details. He did not apologize. The room fell silent. A Kendrick executive stood. "Is it your kid?" he asked, voice low. Miles nodded once. "Yes." The man did not hesitate. "Go," he said. "We can finish later." Miles grabbed his jacket and left, moving fast enough that the air felt sharp in his lungs. He hit the elevator button. Once, twice, 3 times. He forced his hand away. He forced himself to breathe. In the lobby, he nearly ran into Claire. She was walking in with a folder tucked under her arm, hair pulled back, expression already set for a day of work. Then she saw his face. What she said, and it was not a question, it was a command for the truth. Miles swallowed. His throat felt like it had closed. "School called," he said. "Lila collapsed. They are taking her to Northwest." Claire's face changed in a way Miles had never seen. Not fear exactly, something colder and sharper, a focus that narrowed her whole body into motion. I am coming, she said. "You do not have to," Miles started the old reflex. Claire cut him off. "I am coming," she repeated, and there was no space for argument. They moved together fast out into the bright day that suddenly felt hostile. The street smelled like damp concrete warming under rare sunlight. Claire unlocked her car with one click and tossed her folder into the back seat like it was nothing. Miles's hands shook as he buckled in. Claire drove. She did not speed wildly. She drove like a person who understood time and consequences and still chose urgency. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes stayed forward. One hand on the wheel, the other steady on the gear shift. Miles stared out the window at the city passing too slowly. "She was running," he said, more to himself than to Claire. "She runs all the time." Claire did not look at him. "Kids run," she said. "It does not end like this." At the hospital, the air changed the moment they walked through the sliding doors. Cool and dry. The smell of antiseptic and coffee gone stale. A steady chorus of beeps and footsteps, and voices kept low on purpose. A nurse met them near the waiting area. "Miles Carter," she said. Miles nodded. "That is me." "She is in triage," the nurse said. "She is awake. They are doing tests." "Can I see her?" Miles asked. "Soon," she said. "They are placing monitors." Miles's eyes searched the hallway, as if he could see through walls. Claire stood at his shoulder close enough that her presence kept him upright. A few minutes later, a doctor in scrubs approached with a tablet. "Mr. Carter," he said, "I am Dr. Patel. Your daughter had a fainting episode. Her vitals are stable now, but we heard something concerning in her heart sounds. We are running an EKG and an ultrasound. We are also drawing labs." Miles felt his stomach twist. "Her heart," he repeated. Dr. Patel nodded. "It may be nothing serious," he said, voice careful, "but we need to be thorough." Miles's mouth went dry. He nodded too fast, like agreement could help. Claire asked the next questions, calm and precise. "How long until imaging?" she said. "Within the hour," Dr. Patel replied. "Is she in pain?" Claire asked. "She says her chest feels tight," he said. "She is mostly scared." Miles could not stay still. He paced the waiting room steps, short shoulders tight. The chairs were covered in a rough fabric that looked clean but felt tired. A vending machine hummed in the corner. A television played a news channel with the volume low, captions crawling across the bottom like a second heartbeat. Claire sat for a moment, then stood and followed Miles with her eyes tracking him, like she tracked a boardroom. Her hands were empty. No ruler, no phone, nothing to hold. That more than anything made her look human. When they finally led Miles into the room, Lila was lying on a bed that looked too large for her. Sticky monitor pads dotted her chest. A pulse oximeter clipped to her finger blinked red. Her hair was messy. Her face looked pale under the fluorescent lights. Her eyes found Miles and filled instantly. "Daddy," she whispered. Miles went to her and took her hand. It felt small and damp. "I am here," he said. His voice shook. He hated that it shook. "I am right here." Lila's gaze flicked past him and landed on Claire in the doorway. Relief softened her face like she had been holding her breath. "Claire," Lila said hoarse. "No meetings." Claire stepped into the room careful and crouched beside the bed. "No meetings," she promised. Lila's fingers tightened around Miles's. "My chest felt funny," she said, "like when I run too fast." Miles swallowed hard. "You are okay," he said, not sure if it was a lie. A nurse adjusted the monitor. The machine beeped. Lila flinched. Claire rested her hand lightly on the bed frame close, but not touching Lila. "That sound is just the machine talking," she said. "It is boring talk. It is not danger talk." Lila blinked. "Okay," she whispered, and her shoulders lowered a little. Hours moved in fragments after that. They wheeled Lila to imaging. They wheeled her back. Miles sat in a chair that made his spine ache. Claire stood by the window and watched sunlight fade into late afternoon. She checked her phone only once long enough to type a message with quick, decisive fingers. Then she put it away and stayed still. When Dr. Patel returned, his face had changed. Not panic. Something heavier. "Mr. Carter," he said quietly, "we found a congenital heart condition. It is rare. It can go unnoticed until a child grows, becomes more active, and the heart cannot compensate the same way. That may be why this happened today." Miles stared at him. The words did not fit inside his mind at first. "Congenital," he repeated. "She was born with it." "Yes," Dr. Patel said. "We need a pediatric cardiology team. She will need surgery." Miles's vision narrowed. "Surgery?" he whispered. Claire stepped closer. "What kind of surgery?" she asked. Dr. Patel explained, using terms that sounded too clinical for a child with paper cranes on her pillow at home. He spoke of valves and rhythms and structural issues. He spoke of risk. He spoke of urgency that was not minutes but not months either. Miles heard only pieces. He heard complex. He heard specialist. He heard excellent outcomes spoken with a caution that made it feel like a fragile thing. Then Dr. Patel added one more sentence, careful and practical. "The cost can be significant," he said. "Insurance often covers some, but not all." Miles nodded like he understood then, walked out into the hallway, and broke. It was not loud. That would have felt like something he could control. It came out as silence and shaking. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the cold floor, had bowed hands pressed over his face. He thought of Lila's laugh, the blanket fort, the 3 taps, the paper cranes on the shelf. He thought of the word surgery and felt it crush the air out of him. He did not hear footsteps until Claire was kneeling beside him. She did not ask if he was okay. She did not tell him to be strong. She put her arms around him and held him firm and close, like she was keeping him from slipping out of his own body. "I cannot lose her," Miles said into her shoulder, voice raw. "I cannot." Claire's hand moved up his back, steady. "You will not," she said, and the conviction in her voice made him cling to it, even when he could not believe it. Miles pulled back enough to look at her. His eyes burned. "I cannot pay for this," he whispered. Claire's face went still. The CEO part of her stepped forward, not as armor, but as force. "Do not," she said. "Do not talk like that." Miles shook his head. "It is real," he said. "It is always real." Claire's gaze held his hard and clear. "So am I," she replied. He stared, confused and desperate. "Claire, I cannot ask you to." He started. "You are not asking," she said. "I am telling." Miles tried again, voice breaking. "This is not your responsibility." Claire's mouth tightened. "It is my family," she said. The word family hit Miles like a hand to the chest. Not as romance, as fact, as a line drawn in permanent ink. Claire stood and pulled him up with her. "Come," she said. "We go back to her. Then we solve the rest." Back in Lila's room, Lila was asleep, a thin blanket pulled up to her waist, monitors blinking steadily. Miles sat beside her and held her hand, careful not to tug the wires. Claire stood near the foot of the bed, eyes on the machines reading them like numbers. She made calls in the hallway, voice low controlled. Miles caught fragments as she returned. A consultation, a transfer of records, a pediatric cardiac surgeon, a specialist in Boston. When Miles tried to protest again, Claire lifted her hand, palm out, not harsh, just final. "Save your strength for her," she said. "Let me carry what I can carry." Miles watched her walk away and felt two truths collide inside him: gratitude and shame, relief and fear, love and the terror of needing it. By the next morning, the room was different, not in any comforting way, in a busier way. A cardiologist came in with a clipboard, a nurse adjusted medication, a social worker asked questions about insurance and logistics. Miles answered what he could, then reached the edge of his ability to speak. Claire stepped in smoothly when he faltered. She did not take over his role as father. She took over the parts that could crush him. She arranged for Dr. Naomi Sato, a pediatric cardiac surgeon with a calm reputation and a long list of outcomes that people spoke about in quiet, grateful tones. Dr. Sato flew in for consultation. When she entered the room, her presence was not dramatic. It was precise and reassuring, like a person who had seen fear 1,000 times and knew how to lower it. Dr. Sato explained the procedure with steady patience. She described the risks without cruelty. She described the plan without false promises. She looked at Miles directly. "We will take good care of her," she said. Miles nodded, tears burning behind his eyes. "Please," he whispered. That night, when the hospital grew quieter and the lights dimmed to a soft glow, Lila woke and looked between them. Her voice was small. "Am I going to die?" she asked. "Daddy." Miles felt his throat lock. The question was too big for the room. Claire answered first, voice gentle and certain. "No," she said. "You are going to get help. Then you are going to build more cranes." Lila blinked slowly, as if measuring the truth. "Will you stay?" she asked Claire. Claire stepped closer. "Yes," she said. Lila turned to Miles. "Daddy," she whispered. "Are you scared?" Miles forced a smile that felt like it might crack. "A little," he admitted. "But I am right here." Lila's gaze drifted to Claire's hand, the ring catching the soft hospital light. She stared at it for a long moment. "Is that promise for me too?" she asked. Claire's eyes glistened. She did not let the tears fall yet. "Yes," she said. "It is for you too." Lila nodded, satisfied, in the way children sometimes are when adults finally say something simple. Then she swallowed and whispered, "Claire, stay with Daddy tomorrow. He gets lost." Miles turned his face away fast because his eyes were already spilling. Claire reached for his hand. She held it tight, not hidden, not careful, not worried about who might walk by. The hospital corridor outside could hold its rules. This room held something else. "I promise," Claire told Lila. "I will not leave him." In the hours before surgery, Miles could not eat. Food tasted like paper. Water tasted like metal. He stood by the window of Lila's room and watched rain return, tapping the glass with patient insistence. He thought about the first night Claire knocked on his hotel door. 3 soft taps, a sound that had shifted his life. Now he listened to the hospital sounds and tried not to imagine the ones that could come after. When they wheeled Lila toward the operating room, she looked very small on the gurney. Her stuffed otter was tucked against her side. A paper crane rested in her palm, made from a hospital receipt Miles had folded with shaking fingers. Lila looked at Miles and Claire as they walked beside her. 3 taps, she whispered. Miles touched the side rail and tapped it 3 times soft. Claire did the same, her fingers steady. Lila's eyes closed as the doors swung open and the surgical team took over. The doors shut with a final quiet click. 9 hours is a long time to be a person without control. Miles paced. He sat. He stood. He drank coffee that went cold in his hands. He stared at a vending machine and could not remember what the buttons meant. He prayed once under his breath with words that felt rusty and unfamiliar, like a language he had not used since his wife's funeral. Claire stayed beside him like an anchor. Sometimes she spoke low and practical. Breathe, sit, drink water. Sometimes she said nothing and simply kept her hand in his when he started to drift apart. At one point, Miles leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. He could hear the steady beep of a monitor down the hall, not Lila's, someone else's. It still sounded like a heart insisting on its job. Claire's fingers brushed his. "Look at me," she said softly. He opened his eyes. Her face was pale, but her gaze was steady. She looked scared too. She was just refusing to let it own the room. When the surgeon finally appeared, Miles did not recognize her at first. Dr. Sato's cap was off. Her hair was damp at the temples. Her eyes looked barred, but her mouth held a small, controlled smile. Miles stood so fast his knees nearly buckled. Claire's arm wrapped around his waist without thinking, holding him up. Dr. Sato spoke clearly, as if she understood that every extra word could be a blade. "She did beautifully," she said. "Her heart is strong. With monitoring and follow-up, she should live a normal life." For a moment, Miles could not hear anything after that. The air rushed back into his lungs like he had been underwater. His hands shook, his vision blurred. Claire made a sound that was half laugh and half sob, then pressed her forehead to his shoulder. Miles held her tight and let the tears fall where they wanted. "She is okay," Miles whispered, the words breaking as they left him. Claire pulled back just enough to look at his face. Her eyes were full. Her voice was quiet and certain. "Yes," she said, "she is." The words settled into the room slowly, as if the hospital itself needed time to accept them. Miles let his forehead drop against Claire's hair. He could feel her breathing quick at first, then slowing. His hands were still shaking, but the shaking had changed. It was release now, not collapse. Dr. Sato spoke a few more practical sentences. Recovery time, monitoring, follow-up appointments, a list of signs to watch for. Miles nodded at all of it, storing the details in a part of his mind that could function again. When the surgeon walked away, Claire stayed close, her arm still around Miles's waist. Miles did not say thank you. He did not say anything at all. He just held on because letting go felt like tempting the universe. They were allowed into the recovery area in turns. The hallway outside smelled like hand sanitizer and something faintly sweet from the cafeteria, a smell that did not belong near Fear. A nurse led Miles in first. Lila lay under a thin blanket, her face pale, her lashes dark against her cheeks. A tube ran near her mouth. A monitor blinked steady green numbers and a line that rose and fell like a calm ocean. Miles moved to her side and took her hand. It was cooler now, a good kind of cool. "Hey, Peanut," he whispered, and his voice cracked anyway. "I'm here." Lila did not wake. Her fingers twitched once against his, as if her body recognized the touch before her mind could. When they switched, Claire stepped into the same spot and stood very still, eyes on the monitor. Her hand hovered over the rail, then rested on it lightly. The ring on her finger glinted under the harsh light, a small bright point in a room built for function. Claire leaned in close enough to speak without waking Lila. "You were brave," she murmured. "You did the hard part." Later, when Lila was moved to a quieter room, Miles and Claire sat on either side of the bed. The chairs were stiff. The air was cold. Miles did not care. He watched Lila's chest rise and fall until his own breathing matched it. At some point, Lila's eyes fluttered open. Her mouth moved around a dry swallow. She looked at Miles first, then at Claire. "Did I do it?" she whispered. Miles laughed softly, the sound shaky and wet. "You did it," he said. Lila blinked slowly. "No meetings," she murmured. Claire leaned forward, her voice gentle. "No meetings," she promised. Lila's eyes drifted to Claire's hand. "Promise is still there?" she whispered. Claire lifted her hand slightly so Lila could see it better. "Still here," she said. Lila's eyelids lowered. "Okay," she breathed and fell asleep again, the kind of sleep that did not fight. The days after were not dramatic. They were long. There were nurses who came in at odd hours, adjusting lines and checking readings. There were small walks down the hallway, Lila shuffling in socks, holding Miles's fingers in one hand and her stuffed otter in the other. There were moments when she got tired and angry the way children do when their bodies have been pushed too far. Miles learned the new routines, medications at specific times, breathing exercises, a chart of goals taped to the wall with cheerful stickers that looked out of place against medical equipment. Claire handled the parts that came with forms and numbers. She spoke to insurance, she coordinated with billing, she signed documents with a steady hand and a face that did not invite debate. When a hospital administrator tried to give her polished excuses, Claire's voice stayed calm. "Show me the policy," she said, "and show me the exception process." Miles watched her in those moments and felt a complicated mix of relief and humiliation rise in him. He wanted to be the one who protected his daughter from every threat, including the financial ones. He also understood the truth. He was exhausted. He was afraid. He could not carry everything. One evening when Lila was finally asleep and the corridor outside had quieted, Miles stepped into the hallway and found Claire by the window at the end looking out at rain sliding down the glass. "I hate that you had to do all that," he said. Claire turned her head. "I did not have to," she replied. "I chose." Miles swallowed. "It still feels like too much." Claire walked closer and took his hands, holding them firmly. "You carried her through every fever and every night you thought you would fail," she said. "Let me carry this." Miles stared at her hands on his steady and warm. He nodded once. "Okay," he said, and the word felt like surrender and trust at the same time. When they brought Lila home, Seattle greeted them with a clean, bright afternoon that felt like a miracle. Sunlight poured onto wet sidewalks. Trees looked sharper. The air smelled like damp earth and new leaves. Lila squinted at the light and laughed because it made her eyes water. At the apartment door, she stopped and lifted her knuckles. She tapped 3 times. Miles froze for a heartbeat, then opened the door wide. "Welcome home," he said. Lila stepped inside like she owned the place, again stuffed otter under her arm. She looked at the pile of paper cranes on the shelf and smiled. "They waited," she whispered. Claire stood behind them in the doorway, one hand on the frame taking in the space. The living room looked the same, but everything felt rearranged as if the air had been moved around and set back in a different order. The weeks that followed were filled with appointments and careful steps. Lila's stamina returned slowly like a shy animal. She learned how to listen to her body. Miles learned how to let her rest without panicking. Claire learned the small rhythms of their home, the places where Lila liked her shoes, the exact angle Miles always left the dish towel. At Harborline, the world did not stop spinning, just because their lives had almost snapped in half. The news of the platform restructuring became a constant background noise. Calls, articles, comments. Some praised Claire's boldness, some questioned her motives. Walter stayed polite in meetings and sharp in private the way he always had. People watched Miles too, their curiosity disguised as professionalism. Miles and Claire moved worthily, not because they were ashamed, but because they understood optics. HR documentation was complete. Reporting lines were clean. Decision-making around Miles's role was routed through the COO and legal counsel with an almost excessive level of transparency. Still, whispers happened. Miles heard one near the coffee station. "Must be nice," a voice murmured, meant to be quiet and failing. Miles did not stop walking. He felt the sting anyway. Claire heard it too, sometimes. He could see it in her face when she came home, how her shoulders held tension she did not speak about. She never complained. She simply took off her coat, washed her hands, and knelt beside Lila's homework, like the world had no other claim on her. One night after Lila had fallen asleep, Claire sat at Miles's kitchen table with the ruler in her hands. She turned it slowly, thumb along its worn edge. "I can move you to the platform company," she said. Miles looked up from the sink. "That would quiet them," he replied. "It would do more than quiet them," Claire said. "It would remove the conflict entirely. You would lead the platform as its own operation. Separate board oversight. Separate performance metrics." Miles dried his hands slowly. He thought about his work, the thrill of building something new, the platform becoming the engine Claire described. He thought about the stairs at work. He thought about Lila, fragile and strong at the same time. "And you," he asked, "would you be okay with that?" Claire's gaze stayed steady. "I want you safe," she replied, "in every sense." Miles nodded once. "Then we do it," he said. The transition happened over the next months. It was messy in a quiet corporate way. New paperwork, new titles, new signage, a newly formed subsidiary with a name that sounded boring on purpose, built to last rather than impress. On his last day under the old reporting line, Miles packed his office with the calm of a man who had seen what mattered and what did not. He took the framed photo of Lila. He took the small stack of paper cranes she had made him. He left behind the rest. Claire did not walk him out. She could not publicly. Instead, when he arrived at his new office in the platform wing, there was a small object on his desk. Her metal ruler. No note, no explanation. Just the tool that had grounded her, placed in his space like a quiet passing of weight. That spring, on a day when Seattle surprised everyone with clear blue sky, Miles and Claire married. It was small, no press, no Harborline banners, a handful of close friends. Lila, in a simple dress with a tiny paper crane tucked into her hair like a secret crown. Claire wore a dress that looked like her clean lines and no excess. Miles wore a suit that fit properly for the first time in years. When the officiant asked for vows, Miles looked at Claire's eyes and felt his throat tighten. He did not give a speech. He gave the truth. "I choose you," he said, voice low. Voice low. "Every day." Claire's voice was steady, but her eyes shone. "I choose you," she replied, "and I choose her." Lila stood between them, holding both their hands, squeezing hard, like she was sealing the words in place. A year later, their home sounded different. There was laughter in the mornings, not constant, real laughter, the kind that arrives without permission. The kitchen smelled like toast and coffee, and sometimes burned pancakes. A calendar on the wall held color-coded appointments, not just meetings and deadlines, but school projects and cardiology check-ins, and a reminder that said, "Build fort." In the living room, Lila knelt over a science project, tongue stuck out in concentration. A model bridge made from craft sticks spread across the coffee table. Claire sat beside her with sleeves rolled up, measuring angles with a ruler that belonged to this house now. Miles stood in the doorway with a mug in his hand, watching them. "Does it hold?" Lila asked, serious. Claire pressed down gently with 2 fingers. The bridge held. Lila's grin burst wide. "It holds," she announced. Miles felt warmth flood his chest. He did not move, not right away. He watched the way Claire leaned closer to help Lila adjust one beam, patient and focused. He watched the way Lila's fingers moved with confidence, no fear in her beak. Lila glanced up and spotted him. Her eyes brightened. She lifted her knuckles and tapped on the table edge. 3 times. Miles walked in and tapped back soft, like answering a door that had finally become home. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.